Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. But I didn't make it home. I don't remember sitting down. I don't remember closing my eyes. The last thing I remember was passing the old theater, the marquee with its missing letters, the dark windows reflecting nothing. Then nothing. I woke on a bench. Not my bench. Not a bench I recognized. It was wooden, old, weathered by years of rain and sun. It sat in a small park I had never seen, surrounded by trees I didn't know. I sat up slowly, my head heavy with sleep I hadn't chosen. The sky was lightening, dawn approaching. I had been out all night. I looked for the skyline. The familiar towers that marked the center of my city, that guided me home on countless nights. They should have been to the east, where the sun was rising. They were to the west. I stood up, my heart pounding. The skyline was there, unmistakable, the tall glass building, the older stone tower, the bridge I crossed every day. But they were on the wrong side. The skyline had swapped sides. I turned in a slow circle. The park was ordinary. The trees were ordinary. The bench was ordinary. But everything was wrong. The sun was rising in the west. The skyline was in the east. The world had flipped while I slept. I walked to the edge of the park, found a street, started walking. The buildings were familiar, the same architecture, the same style, but arranged differently. Streets that should have led one way led another. Corners that should have been familiar were strange. I walked for hours, trying to find something I recognized. The city was my city, but rearranged. Like someone had picked it up and rotated it while I slept. I reached a corner that should have been Fifth and Wells. The street signs were there, confirming it. But the coffee shop was on the wrong side. The bookstore was across the street from where it should have been. The old theater was nowhere in sight. I stood there, trying to understand. The world had shifted. The skyline had swapped sides. Nothing was where it should be. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on me with that ancient knowing. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You woke up," she said. I nodded. On a bench. In a park I've never seen. She smiled. That small smile. "You fell asleep walking. It happens sometimes. To people who are tired enough, who have walked long enough, who have seen enough impossible things." She looked around at the rearranged city. The world rearranged itself while you slept. It does that, sometimes. When someone's been away too long. When someone needs to see things differently. I looked at the familiar streets in unfamiliar positions. How do I find my way home? I asked. She looked at me with those ancient eyes. You don't. Not today. Today you learn to navigate a world that's been flipped. Today you learn that home isn't where you left it, it's where you find it. She reached out and took my hand. "Come," she said. "I'll show you." We walked together through the rearranged city. Streets that had been straight now curved. Buildings that had stood together now stood apart. The skyline followed us, always on the wrong side, always reminding me that nothing was as it had been. But she was with me. Her hand was warm. Her steps were sure. We walked for hours, through neighborhoods I almost recognized, past corners that were almost familiar. She pointed out landmarks I had never seen, told me stories I had never heard. And slowly, I began to understand. The city hadn't changed. I had. I had fallen asleep walking, and in my sleep, I had become someone who saw things differently. The skyline hadn't swapped sides, I had swapped my understanding of where I was. "This is your city now," she said. "The one you'll walk from now on. It's the same as the old one, but different. Like you." She squeezed my hand, then let go. "You'll find your way home," she said. "It just might take longer than you expected." She stepped back. She began to fade. "Will I see you again?" I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. "Every time you wake up somewhere unexpected. Every time the world rearranges itself while you sleep. I'll be there, waiting to show you the way." Then she was gone, and I was alone in the rearranged city. I stood there for a long time, looking at the skyline on the wrong side. Then I started walking. Not toward home, I didn't know where home was anymore. Just walking. Learning. Seeing. I still walk every night. The city is still rearranged, the skyline still on the wrong side. But I've learned to navigate it. I've learned that home isn't a place, it's the walking itself. And sometimes, when I'm lost and tired, I feel her hand in mine. Warm. Guiding. Showing me the way. I woke on a bench, and the skyline had swapped sides. But I keep walking. Because that's what you do when the world rearranges itself. You keep walking. And eventually, you find your way. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the plaza where the fountain used to be. I remembered it from years ago, when I first moved to this neighborhood. A beautiful fountain, water dancing in the sunlight, children throwing coins and making wishes. It had been torn down years ago, replaced by something more practical. A row of phone booths. Old-fashioned, the kind no one uses anymore. Glass and metal, standing in a neat line where water once flowed. They looked forgotten, abandoned, relics of a time that had passed. She was sitting in one of them. Not inside the booth. On top of it. Legs dangling, hands resting on her knees, looking out at the empty plaza with those ancient eyes. She sat where the fountain used to be, where water used to dance, where wishes used to be made. I walked toward her, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. When I reached the row of phone booths, I stopped and looked up at her. "This used to be a fountain," I said. She nodded slowly. "I remember." "You remember? You were here?" She smiled. That small smile. "I was here when they built it. I was here when they tore it down. I was here when they put these booths in their place." She tapped the glass beside her. "I've been here for all of it." I looked at the phone booths. They seemed older now, sadder, more forgotten. "Why do you stay?" I asked. She looked out at the empty plaza, at the buildings beyond, at the sky above. "Because someone needs to remember." Someone needs to sit where the fountain used to be and remember the water, the children, the wishes. If no one remembers, it's like it never existed. She looked down at me. You remember the fountain. You just said so. I did remember. Vaguely, distantly, but I remembered. Water dancing. Sunlight sparkling. The sound of children laughing. I remember, I said. She smiled again. Wider this time. Then it's still here. In you. In your memory. The fountain lives on, even though the water is gone. She jumped down from the phone booth, landing lightly on the pavement. She stood beside me, both of us looking at the row of booths. Everything that's ever been here is still here, she said. Not in the same form. But in the memory of those who witnessed it. The fountain, the people who made wishes, the coins at the bottom. They're all still here, in the space between what was and what is. She reached out and touched one of the phone booths. Even these will be gone someday. Replaced by something else. And someone will sit where they used to be and remember phone booths, and coins, and people making calls to people they loved. She looked at me. Will you remember? I thought about it. About all the things I had seen change. The fountain. The theater with its missing letters. The bus stop that no longer existed. The streets that had curved and straightened and curved again. I'll try, I said. She nodded. That's all anyone can do. She stepped back. She began to fade. Will I see you again? I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. Every time you remember something that's gone. Every time you sit where something used to be. I'll be there, keeping the memory alive. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the phone booths and the memory of a fountain. I stood there for a long time, looking at the row of booths. They were just booths. Ordinary. Forgotten. But beneath them, I could feel it. The fountain. The water. The wishes. Still there, in the space between what was and what is. I walked home through the ordinary night, carrying the memory with me. I still walk that route every night. I still pass the plaza where the fountain used to be. The phone booths are still there, forgotten and abandoned. But I stop sometimes. I close my eyes. I remember. Water dancing. Sunlight sparkling. Children laughing. And somewhere, in that memory, she's sitting where the fountain used to be. Keeping it alive. Keeping it real. She sat where the fountain used to be, now a row of phone booths. And I learned that nothing ever really disappears. It just changes form. And waits to be remembered. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the corner where the coffee shop should have been. The one I visited yesterday, the one where I bought my usual, black coffee, no sugar, the woman behind the counter who always smiled and said, "See you tomorrow." It wasn't there. In its place was a laundromat. Bright lights, rows of machines, strangers' clothes spinning behind round windows. I could see them through the glass, shirts and pants and sheets, tumbling in endless circles, owned by people I would never know. I stopped. I stared. I tried to understand. Yesterday, this was a coffee shop. I sat at the counter. I drank my coffee. I talked to the woman with the smile. Today, it was a laundromat. Not new, not freshly built, old. Worn. The kind of place that had been here for years. I walked closer, pressed my face to the window. Inside, a man folded a shirt. A woman read a magazine while her clothes spun. The machines hummed their steady rhythm, the sound of water and motion and ordinary life. There was no trace of the coffee shop. No counter, no cups, no smiling woman. Just strangers' clothes, spinning in the light. I stepped back, confused. Had I imagined the coffee shop? Had I dreamed it? The memory was so clear, the taste of the coffee, the warmth of the cup, her smile when she said, "See you tomorrow." But tomorrow was here, and the coffee shop was gone. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on the laundromat. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You remember the coffee shop," she said. I nodded. I was there yesterday. I drank coffee. I talked to the woman. She looked at the laundromat, then back at me. And now it's a laundromat. How? I asked. How can it change so fast? She smiled. That small smile. It didn't change fast. It changed slowly, over years. You just weren't paying attention. I shook my head. That's not possible. I was here yesterday. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint lines around her eyes, the slight smile on her lips. Were you? Or were you here in a version of yesterday that no longer exists? Time isn't a line. It's a web. Sometimes you step from one thread to another without noticing. I looked at the laundromat, at the stranger's clothes spinning behind glass. So the coffee shop is still somewhere? In another thread? She nodded slowly. In another version of this street, on another thread of time, the coffee shop is still there. The woman is still smiling. You're still drinking your coffee. She reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart. But you're here now. In this thread. In this version of the world. And in this version, it's a laundromat. I felt the weight of it. The loss of a place that still existed somewhere, but not here. Not for me. What do I do? I asked. How do I find my way back? She shook her head slowly. You don't. You can't go back to a thread you've left. You can only move forward, in whatever thread you find yourself in. She gestured at the laundromat. But you can visit. You can stand here and remember the coffee shop. You can carry it with you. That's what memory is, carrying other threads with you as you walk through this one. I looked at the laundromat again. It was just a laundromat. Ordinary. Real. But beneath it, I could feel it. The coffee shop. The counter. The smiling woman. Still there, in another thread, in another version of this street. I'll remember, I said. She smiled. That small smile. I know you will. She stepped back. She began to fade. Will I see you again? I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. Every time you lose something and remember it. Every time you stand where something used to be and carry it with you. I'll be there, in the space between threads. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the laundromat and the memory of coffee. I stood there for a long time, just remembering. The taste of the coffee. The warmth of the cup. Her smile when she said, "See you tomorrow." Tomorrow was here, and the coffee shop was gone. But the memory remained. I walked home through the ordinary night, carrying the coffee shop with me. I still walk that route every night. The laundromat is still there, strangers' clothes still spinning. But when I pass it, I slow down. I remember. And sometimes, just for a moment, I see it. The coffee shop. The counter. The woman with the smile. Still there, in another thread, in another version of this street. The coffee shop I'd visited yesterday was a laundromat spinning strangers' clothes. And I learned that we walk through many threads without knowing it. All we can do is remember the ones we've left behind. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached my street. The one where my building stood, number 147, 3rd floor, the window with the crack in the corner. I had walked this street 1,000 times. I knew it in my sleep. Tonight, I didn't recognize it. The buildings were the same. The street was the same. But the numbers were wrong. I walked past 142, then 144, then 146. My building should have been next. 147, I knew it should have been next. It wasn't. Where 147 should have been stood 149. And where 149 should have been stood 151. The numbers had been rearranged, shuffled like cards, moved in the night while I slept. I walked back the other way. 151, 149, 147. Number 151, 149, 147 should have been there, but it wasn't. The building that stood where my building should have been wore a different number entirely. I stopped in front of it, trying to understand. The building looked like mine. Same brick, same windows, same door. But the number was wrong. 162, not 147. 162, I walked to the next building. It wore 147. The building next to where my building should have been now wore my number. I walked up to it, my heart pounding. This building looked different. Slightly different brick. Different door. Different windows. But it wore my number. 147, I tried the door. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The hallway was wrong. The stairs were on the wrong side. The smell was different. I climbed to the 3rd floor, found the door that should have been mine. Apartment 3B. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I stood there, in a building that wasn't mine, outside an apartment that should have been mine but wasn't, wearing a number that belonged to me but led nowhere I recognized. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I turned. She was there, walking up toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on me with that ancient knowing. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. The numbers have been rearranged, I said. She nodded. They do that sometimes. Why? She looked around at the unfamiliar hallway. Because the city gets bored. Because the numbers need a change. Because sometimes you need to be reminded that home isn't a number, it's a feeling. I looked at the door in front of me. Apartment 3B. Not mine. Where is my apartment? I asked. Where is my bed, my things, my life? She smiled. That small smile. Still there. Still yours. Just wearing a different number now. You'll find it. You just have to look. She turned and walked back down the stairs. I followed. We walked through the rearranged streets, past buildings with swapped numbers, past houses that wore unfamiliar addresses. She led me block after block, through the shuffled city, until we stopped in front of a building that looked like mine. Same brick. Same windows. Same door. "This is it," she said. I looked at the number. 147, it was the building I had first stopped at, the one that looked like mine but wore the wrong number. But now it wore the right number. I tried the door. It opened. The hallway was right. The stairs were on the right side. The smell was familiar. I climbed to the third floor. Apartment 3B. I tried the handle. It opened. My apartment. My bed. My things. My life. All there, waiting for me. I turned to thank her. She was standing in the doorway, watching me with those ancient eyes. "They'll rearrange them again," she said. "Someday. When you least expect it." She stepped back into the hallway. "But now you know. Home isn't a number. It's what you carry with you." She began to fade. "Will I see you again?" I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. "Every time you get lost. Every time the numbers change. I'll be there, ready to lead you home." Then she was gone, and I was alone in my apartment, in my bed, in my life. I stood there for a long time, just feeling. The familiarity. The rightness. The knowledge that home wasn't a number, it was the place where I belonged. I still walk that route every night. I still check the numbers. And sometimes, they're different. Rearranged. Shuffled. But I know now that it doesn't matter. My home is wherever I carry it. Wherever I remember that I belong. I tried to find my building, but the numbers had been rearranged in the night. And I learned that home isn't an address. It's a feeling. And no one can rearrange that. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the block where the old buildings stood. They were ordinary, unremarkable, the kind you pass without thinking. But tonight, one of them had a door I had never noticed before. It was old wood, dark with age, with a handle worn smooth by hands I couldn't see. It stood between 2 buildings, in a space that should have been too narrow for a door. But there it was, solid and real, waiting. I stopped and stared at it. I had walked this block 1,000 times. I had never seen this door. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on the door. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You see it," she said. I nodded. "I've never noticed it before." She smiled. That small smile. "It's always been here. You just weren't ready to see it." She walked to the door and placed her hand on the handle. Then she looked back at me and pointed. "Open it," she said. I walked to the door. I took the handle. It was warm under my hand, alive in a way that shouldn't be. I pushed. The door opened onto a street from another city entirely. I knew it instantly. Not from memory, but from feeling. The buildings were different, older, narrower, built from stone instead of brick. The street was cobblestone, not asphalt. The air smelled different, salt, maybe, or something else I couldn't name. The streetlights were gas lamps, not electric, their flames flickering in the night. I stood in the doorway, 1 foot in my city, 1 foot in this other place. The contrast was dizzying. Familiar behind me. Strange ahead. I looked back at her. She was still there, watching me with those ancient eyes. Where does it go? I asked. She shrugged gently. Everywhere. Anywhere. It depends on who opens it. I looked back at the strange street. It was empty, quiet, beautiful in its foreignness. Can I go through? She nodded slowly. You can. But you might not come back. Doors like this, they don't always open both ways. I thought about that. About my apartment, my job, my life. About the street behind me, familiar and ordinary. About the street ahead, strange and waiting. Will you be there? I asked. If I go through? She smiled. That small smile. I'm always there. In every city. On every street. Behind every door. I took a breath. I stepped through. The door closed behind me with a soft click. I was on the strange street, surrounded by stone buildings and gas lamps and air that smelled of salt. I turned to look back. The door was gone. Just a solid wall where it had been. I stood alone in a city I didn't know, on a street I had never seen, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. And then I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me down the cobblestone street, her ancient eyes fixed on me. When she reached me, she stopped and smiled. Welcome, she said. I looked around at the strange city. Where are we? She looked up at the unfamiliar stars, then back at me. Somewhere you've never been. Somewhere that's been waiting for you. She reached out and took my hand. Come, she said. I'll show you. We walked together through the strange city, under the gas lamps, past buildings I had never seen. The streets curved and twisted, leading us deeper into a place that felt like a dream. I don't know how long we walked. Time had no meaning in that place. But eventually, we came to another door. Old wood, dark with age, with a handle worn smooth. She pointed to it. Open it, she said. I took the handle. I pushed. The door opened onto my street. The coffee shop. The bookstore. The old theater. My city, familiar and ordinary, waiting for me. I looked back at her. She was still there, watching me with those ancient eyes. Will I see you again? I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. Every time you find a door you've never noticed. Every time you step into somewhere new. I'll be there, waiting to show you the way. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the doorway between two cities. I stepped through. The door closed behind me. I was home. I still walk that route every night. And sometimes, when I pass between the old buildings, I see it. A door I've never noticed before. Old wood, dark with age, with a handle worn smooth. I don't always open it. But I know it's there. Waiting. And somewhere, on the other side, she's waiting too. She pointed to a door that opened onto a street from another city entirely. And I learned that the world is full of doors we never notice. Until we're ready to open them. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the crack I knew. The one on the corner of 5th and Wells, just before the crosswalk. I had stepped over it 1,000 times. It was shaped like a Y, with one branch longer than the other, a small chip missing from the left side. I knew it like I knew my own reflection. I stepped over it and kept walking. I should have reached the bookstore. Instead, I reached a corner I didn't recognize. I stopped. I looked around. The buildings were wrong. The street signs were wrong. The air felt different, tasted different, smelled different. I turned and looked back. The crack was there, behind me, still shaped like a Y. But it was in a different place now, on a different street, leading to a different corner. I walked back to it. I stood over it, looking down at its familiar shape. Then I stepped over it again. This time, I reached a different corner. Another street I didn't know. Another part of the city I had never seen. I stepped back over the crack. Returned to the unfamiliar corner. Stepped over again. Another corner. The crack was a door. A portal. A path that led somewhere new every time I crossed it. I stood there, one foot on either side of the Y-shaped crack, trying to understand. The crack I had stepped over 1,000 times, the crack I knew like my own reflection, it had always been this. A way to other places. I just hadn't known. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on the crack beneath my feet. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You found it," she said. I looked down at the crack. "It's always been here. I've stepped over it 1,000 times." She nodded. "And every time, it could have taken you somewhere new. But you never noticed. You never wondered." I looked at the unfamiliar corner on the other side of the crack. "Where does it lead?" She smiled. That small smile. "Everywhere. Anywhere. It depends on what you need." I stepped fully over the crack, leaving my familiar street behind. I stood on the unfamiliar corner, looking at buildings I had never seen. She followed me, stepping over the crack as easily as stepping through a door. "Every crack is like this," she said. "Every imperfection in the pavement, every break in the concrete. They're all doors. All paths. All waiting for someone to notice." I looked back at the crack. From this side, it looked the same. Y-shaped, familiar, ordinary. "Can I go back?" I asked. She nodded. "You can always go back. The crack doesn't close. It waits." I looked at the unfamiliar street ahead. It stretched into darkness, lined with buildings I didn't know, under a sky full of stars I couldn't name. "I want to see where it leads," I said. She smiled. That small smile. "Then let's walk." We walked together through the unfamiliar streets, following the path the crack had given me. The city unfolded around us, strange and beautiful, full of corners I had never turned and lights I had never seen. We walked for hours, for days, for moments that had no measure. And eventually, we came to another crack. Shaped like a Y, familiar, waiting. "This will take you home," she said. I looked at the crack, then back at her. "Will I see you again?" She smiled. "Every time you notice a crack. Every time you wonder where it leads. I'll be there, on the other side." She stepped back. She began to fade. "Go home," she said. "Rest. And tomorrow night, when you walk your route, look at the cracks. Really look." Then she was gone, and I was alone with the Y-shaped crack. I stepped over it. I was on my street, in front of the bookstore, ordinary and familiar. The crack was there, behind me, Y-shaped and waiting. I walked home. I slept. I woke to another day. I still walk that route every night. And now, when I reach the crack on the corner of 5th and Wells, I stop. I look at it. Really look. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the city is still, I step over it. Just to see where it leads. The familiar crack in the pavement now leads to a different corner. And I've learned that even the most ordinary things can be doors. If you're willing to step through. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the block where the bakery used to be. It had been there for as long as I could remember, a small shop with a red awning, the smell of fresh bread drifting onto the street every morning. I had bought bread there hundreds of times, warm loaves that filled my apartment with the smell of home. Tonight, the smell was still there. I stopped. I breathed in. Fresh bread, warm and yeasty, exactly as I remembered. It wrapped around me like a memory, like a comfort, like something I had lost and found again. I looked for the bakery. It wasn't there. In its place was a shoe store. Bright lights, rows of shoes, signs in a language I didn't know. The letters were unfamiliar, the words unreadable, the meaning completely lost on me. But the smell of bread still hung in the air. I walked closer, pressed my face to the window. Shoes. Just shoes. Rows and rows of them, in styles I had never seen, in colors that didn't make sense. The signs above them meant nothing to me. But the smell. The smell was bread. Fresh, warm, impossible bread. I stepped back, confused. The bakery was gone. The shoe store was there. But the smell remained, as if the bread was still being baked somewhere behind those walls, in a kitchen that no longer existed. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on the shoe store with its unfamiliar signs. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You smell it," she said. I nodded. "Bread. From the bakery that used to be here." She smiled. That small smile. "It's still here. The smell. The memory. The bread. They don't go away just because the shop changes." She looked at the shoe store, at the signs I couldn't read. "This place sells shoes now. To people who speak a different language. But beneath the shoes, beneath the signs, beneath the newness, the bread is still there. Still warm. Still waiting." I breathed in again. The smell was strong, clear, unmistakable. "Will it ever go away?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not as long as someone remembers. Not as long as someone walks past and breathes in and says, 'That smells like bread.'" She reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart. "You're carrying it now. The smell. The memory. The bread. Every time you remember, it gets a little stronger. A little more real." I felt it then. The warmth of the bread, the memory of the bakery, the comfort of something familiar in a world that kept changing. "What about the shoes?" I asked. "The language I don't know?" She looked at the store, at the unfamiliar signs. "They're real too. For the people who need them. For the people who speak that language. This place is both things at once, a shoe store for them, a bakery for you." She turned back to me. "That's how places work. They're different for everyone who visits. She stepped back. She began to fade. Will I see you again? I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. Every time you smell something that shouldn't be there. Every time you remember what used to be. I'll be there, in the space between the bread and the shoes. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the shoe store and the smell of bread. I stood there for a long time, breathing in. The smell was fading now, growing fainter, but I could still feel it. Still carry it. I walked home through the ordinary night, carrying the memory of bread. I still walk that route every night. I still pass the shoe store with its unfamiliar signs. And every time, I stop. I breathe in. Sometimes the smell is there. Sometimes it's not. But I remember it. I carry it. The bakery is gone. The shoes are there. The language is unknown. But the bread is still real. In my memory. In my heart. In the part of me that remembers what used to be. I smelled bread from a bakery that now sold shoes in a language I didn't know. And I learned that nothing ever really disappears. It just waits. For someone to remember. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the corner of 5th and Wells. The same corner where I had seen her so many times before. And tonight, she was there. She stood under the streetlight, facing me, her arms at her sides. But in her hands, she held something I had never seen her hold before. A newspaper. Not just any newspaper. I could see the date from where I stood. It was next week. A date that hadn't happened yet. A day that was still waiting to arrive. I walked closer, my eyes fixed on the paper. When I reached her, I stopped and looked at it. The headline was something I didn't recognize. An event I hadn't heard of. A story that hadn't been written yet. She held it out to me. I took it, my hands trembling. The weather forecast was for next Thursday. Sunny, with a chance of clouds in the afternoon. A high of 72 degrees. A low of 58. It was weather that hadn't happened yet. Weather that might never happen, depending on how the week unfolded. I looked up at her. Her ancient eyes were watching me, patient and knowing. How do you have this? I asked. She smiled. That small smile. I have many things. Things that haven't happened yet. Things that might never happen. Things that will happen whether anyone wants them to or not. She gestured at the paper. That's next week. A version of it, anyway. There are other versions, other papers, other weather. But this one is likely. I looked back at the paper. The date. The forecast. The headline I didn't recognize. Can I keep it? I asked. She shook her head slowly. No. It has to go back. To the place where future news waits to become present. She held out her hand. I gave her back the paper. What happens next week? I asked. Will the weather be like this? She looked at the paper, then at me. Maybe. Maybe not. The future is flexible. It changes based on what we do now. This paper is just one possibility. She folded the newspaper carefully, tucking it away somewhere I couldn't see. But it's a useful thing to hold. A reminder that the future is coming, whether we're ready or not. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint lines around her eyes, the slight smile on her lips. You should think about that. About the weather next week. About what you'll be doing when it arrives. I thought about it. Next Thursday. A day that didn't exist yet. A day that would come whether I was ready or not. What will I be doing? I asked. She smiled. That small smile. That's up to you. The paper only knows the weather. Not the people living in it. She stepped back. She began to fade. Will I see you again? I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. Every time you wonder about the future. Every time you think about next week. I'll be there, holding a newspaper you haven't read yet. Then she was gone, and I was alone on the corner, thinking about next Thursday. I walked home through the ordinary night. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. But my mind was full of next week, of weather that hadn't happened yet, of days that were still waiting. I still walk that route every night. And sometimes, when I reach the corner of 5th and Wells, I think about next Thursday. About the forecast she showed me. About the day that's coming. I don't know if the weather will be sunny with a chance of clouds. I don't know if the headline she showed me will come true. But I know that next week is coming. And I'll be here, walking this route, living this life, when it arrives. She held a newspaper dated next week, with weather that hadn't happened yet. And I learned that the future is always approaching. Whether we're ready or not. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was driving home from the late shift, the same route I had driven for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every traffic light, every turn, every lane change by heart. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My hands gripped the wheel loosely, my eyes half focused on the road ahead. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the first intersection. The light was green. I drove through. The next light was green too. And the next. A string of greens, perfectly timed, as if the city was ushering me home. Then they started blinking. Not red, not yellow, not green. Blinking. In patterns I had never seen. Long flashes, short flashes, sequences that made no sense. They blinked in rhythm with each other, talking across intersections, sharing information I couldn't understand. I stopped at the first blinking light. Red? Yellow? I couldn't tell. It blinked 3 times fast, then twice slow, then once long. I waited, unsure what to do. No cars came from any direction. The streets were empty, the city silent, the only movement the blinking lights in their impossible patterns. I drove on, slowly, watching the lights blink their messages. At each intersection, they greeted me with new sequences, new rhythms, new languages I couldn't read. The patterns matched no city I'd ever driven through. No traffic system I'd ever learned. They were speaking to each other, to the night, to something I couldn't see. I reached the corner of 5th and Wells. The light there was blinking differently. Slower. More deliberate. It seemed to be waiting for me. I stopped. I watched. The light blinked, long, short, short, long. Then repeated. Over and over. A pattern. A message. I heard footsteps. I looked in my rearview mirror. She was there, walking toward my car down the empty street. I rolled down my window as she approached. The lights are blinking, I said. She nodded. They're talking. To who? She looked up at the intersection, at the light repeating its pattern. To each other. To the night. To anyone who knows how to listen. She leaned down, looking at me through the open window. That pattern, long, short, short, long, it means the way is clear. It's telling you that you can go home. That the path ahead is safe. I looked at the blinking light. Long, short, short, long. Over and over. How do you know that? I asked. She smiled. That small smile. I've been listening for a long time. Longer than you've been alive. The lights have been talking forever. Most people just never learn their language. She straightened up and pointed down the street. Follow the patterns. They'll lead you home. I looked at the next light down the block. It was blinking too. Different pattern. Faster. What's that one saying? I asked. She listened for a moment. That one says, turn left. The one after that will say, straight. The one after that will say, you're almost there. I looked at the lights, at their blinking patterns, at the city that had suddenly become a conversation. Will I ever learn their language? I asked. She looked at me with those ancient eyes. You're learning now. Just by asking. Just by wondering. Just by noticing that they're talking at all. She stepped back from the car. She began to fade. Follow the lights, she said. They'll take you home. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the blinking patterns. I drove on, following the lights. Turn left. Straight. Right. Almost there. The patterns guided me through streets I knew, past buildings I recognized, until I reached my apartment. I parked. I sat in the car for a long time, looking at the last light. It blinked a pattern I didn't understand, but somehow I knew what it meant. Welcome home. I still drive that route every night. And now, when the lights blink, I listen. I'm learning their language, slowly, pattern by pattern. They talk about the weather. About traffic. About the time of night. About things I don't understand yet. But I'm learning. Because she taught me that everything is speaking, all the time. You just have to learn to listen. The traffic lights blinked in patterns that matched no city I'd ever driven through. But I'm learning their language now. And they're telling me the way home. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached into my pocket for my house keys. A habit, a reassurance, a way of knowing I would soon be home. My hand closed around metal. Lots of metal. More keys than I should have had. I pulled them out and looked at my hands. Keys. Dozens of them. Old keys, new keys, rusted keys, shiny keys. They spilled from my palm, dangling on rings, on chains, on nothing at all. I held them up to the streetlight, trying to understand where they had come from. I didn't recognize any of them. There was a large iron key, the kind that might open a castle door. A small brass key, delicate and ornate. A modern key with a plastic fob, the kind that opens an apartment building. Keys of every shape, every size, every age. But I knew, somehow, that none of them would open anything that still existed. The locks they fit were gone. The doors they opened had been torn down. The rooms they led to had been emptied years ago. I held keys to locks that no longer existed. I stood there in the wet street, keys dangling from my hands, trying to understand. Where had they come from? Why were they in my pocket? What was I supposed to do with keys that opened nothing? I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her eyes fixed on the keys in my hands. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You found them," she said. I looked at the keys, then at her. "Found what?" "The keys. The ones you've been carrying your whole life. Keys to places you've been, places you've left, places that no longer exist." She reached out and touched one of the keys, the large iron one. "This one opened the front door of the house you grew up in. It's been torn down for years, but you still carry the key." She touched another. "This one opened your first apartment. The one with the leaky faucet and the noisy neighbors. Gone now. Renovated into something else." She touched another, and another, naming each one. "Childhood home. First love's apartment. The office where you worked your first job. The locker from high school. The suitcase from your first trip alone." Each key held a memory. Each lock was gone. I looked at the keys in my hands, suddenly heavy with meaning. "What do I do with them?" I asked. "If the locks are gone?" She smiled. That small smile. "You keep them. You carry them. They're not for opening doors anymore, they're for remembering. For honoring the places you've been." She closed my hands around the keys, pressing them gently. "Every key is a story. Every lock that no longer exists is a chapter that's ended. You don't throw away the keys just because the doors are gone." I felt the weight of them. The stories. The memories. The places I had been and left behind. Will I ever stop carrying them? I asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. They're part of you now. They'll always be part of you." She stepped back. She began to fade. "But you'll get used to the weight. And someday, you'll be grateful for it." She was almost gone now, just an outline, just a memory. "Will I see you again?" I asked. Her smile was the last thing to go. "Every time you hold your keys and remember. Every time you think about the doors you've walked through. I'll be there, in the weight of them." Then she was gone, and I was alone with my hands full of keys. I stood there for a long time, looking at them. Each one held a memory. Each one was a door I had walked through, a place I had been, a life I had lived. I put them back in my pocket. They were heavy, but it was a good weight. A weight of remembering. I walked home through the ordinary night, keys jingling with every step. I still walk that route every night. I still carry those keys. They're heavy, but I've gotten used to them. And sometimes, when I'm tired and alone, I take them out and look at them. I remember the doors they opened. The places they led to. The lives I've lived. I looked down at my hands and held keys to locks that no longer existed. And I learned that even when doors are gone, the keys remain. Carrying the weight of where we've been. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. But tonight, the streets were different. Not wrong, not rearranged, just restless. The buildings seemed to shift as I passed, adjusting themselves by inches I couldn't quite see. The pavement under my feet felt alive, breathing with a rhythm I couldn't quite catch. The streetlights flickered in patterns that almost meant something. I stopped at the corner of 5th and Wells. The same corner where I had seen her so many times before. And tonight, she was there. She stood under the streetlight, facing me, her ancient eyes watching me approach. But tonight, there was something different in her expression. Not patience. Not knowing. Something softer. Understanding. I reached her and stopped. Before I could speak, she raised a finger to her lips. "Listen," she whispered. I listened. The city was humming, but differently than before. It was a restless hum, a moving hum, a hum that suggested the city was thinking about going somewhere. "They do this sometimes," she whispered. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the hum. "Who?" I whispered back. She gestured at the buildings, the streets, the lights around us. "The cities. They get restless. They remember that they used to wander." I stared at her. "Cities wander?" She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Long ago, before people built them to stay in one place, cities moved. They followed water, followed weather, followed whatever called to them. They had feet then, not foundations." She looked around at the restless buildings. "Now they're fixed. Pinned down by concrete and law and human need. But sometimes, late at night, they remember. They shift. They stretch. They think about leaving." I felt it then. The restlessness. The desire to move. The city wasn't just a collection of buildings, it was a living thing, and it wanted to wander. "Can it?" I asked. "Can a city just leave?" She smiled. That small smile. "Not fully. Not anymore. The foundations are too deep, the people too many. But it can dream. It can shift. It can remind itself what it used to be." She reached out and touched the lamppost beside her. It trembled under her hand, as if responding to her touch. "They do this sometimes," she repeated. "They remember. They yearn. They shift just enough to feel alive." I looked around at the restless city. The buildings leaned slightly, as if listening for something. The pavement rippled gently, like water disturbed by wind. The streetlights hummed a song I almost recognized. "What happens when they remember?" I asked. She looked at me with those ancient eyes. "They become more themselves. More alive. More real. For one night, they stop being just a place and start being a presence." She stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her, the reality of her. "You're lucky," she said. "You get to see it. Most people sleep through the wanderings. They wake up and everything is the same, and they never know what almost happened." I looked at the restless city around us. It was beautiful. Terrifying. Alive. "Will it ever really leave?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not in your lifetime. Not in mine. But someday, maybe, when the last person is gone and the foundations crumble, it will remember how to wander. It will rise up and go looking for wherever cities go when they're free." She stepped back. She began to fade. "They do this sometimes," she whispered one last time. As if cities had rights to wander. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the restless city. I stood there for a long time, feeling the city shift around me. It was subtle, gentle, almost imperceptible. But it was there. The memory of movement. The desire to wander. I walked home through streets that seemed to breathe. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, still gleaming under the streetlights like the skin of something that had just emerged from deep water. I was walking home from the late shift, the same route I had walked for 3 years. Left at the coffee shop, right at the bookstore, straight for 6 blocks, left at the old theater. I knew every crack in the pavement, every hum of every streetlight, every shadow that fell across my path. I was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. My feet dragged against the pavement, each step an effort. I just wanted to get home, fall into bed, and forget the world existed for a few hours. I reached the corner where the coffee shop should have been. It wasn't there. In its place stood a bookstore. Not my bookstore, a different one, with books I'd never seen in windows I didn't recognize. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still a bookstore. I walked on, faster now, to where the bookstore should have been. It was a bakery now, warm light spilling onto the pavement, the smell of bread filling the air. But not my bakery. A different one. I turned the corner where the old theater should have been. It was a theater, but wrong. Different marquee, different movies, different name. The night had reshuffled the world. I walked through streets I had known for years, and nothing was where it should be. The buildings were the same bricks, same windows, same doors, but their purposes had been swapped, shuffled, rearranged while I slept. I was a tourist in my own neighborhood. I stopped at a corner I didn't recognize, though I had stood here 1,000 times. The street signs were the same. The layout was the same. But everything else was wrong. I felt lost. Completely, utterly lost. In the place I had called home for 3 years. I heard footsteps. I turned. She was there, walking toward me slowly, her ancient eyes watching me with that familiar patience. When she reached me, she stopped and looked at me. "The night reshuffled the world," I said. She nodded. "It does that sometimes. When it's bored. When it wants to remind us that nothing is permanent." I looked around at the familiar streets. "How do I find my way home?" I asked. "When everything is wrong?" She smiled. That small smile. "You look. You wander. You let yourself be a tourist for a while. And eventually, you start to recognize things. Not by where they are, but by what they are." She pointed at a building across the street. "That's still a bakery. Even though it's not your bakery. The bread is still warm. The people inside are still baking." She pointed at another. "That's still a theater. Even though it's showing different movies. The stories are still being told." She looked back at me. "Your home is still your home. Even if the streets around it have changed. You'll find it. You just have to look with new eyes." She stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint lines around her eyes, the slight smile on her lips. Being a tourist in your own neighborhood isn't a bad thing. It's a gift. A chance to see what you've been missing. A chance to fall in love with your home all over again. She stepped back. She began to fade. "Walk," she said. "Explore. Get lost. And when you find your way home, you'll know it better than you ever did before." Then she was gone, and I was alone in my reshuffled neighborhood. I walked. For hours, I wandered through streets I thought I knew, seeing them for the first time. I found bakeries where there used to be bookstores. Theaters where there used to be coffee shops. Shops where there used to be nothing at all. And slowly, I began to recognize things. Not by their location, but by their essence. The warmth of the bakery. The stories of the theater. The comfort of a coffee shop, even if it was in a different place. Eventually, I found my building. It was still there, still 147, still waiting. The street around it was different, but my door was the same. I went inside. I climbed the stairs. I opened my apartment. Home. I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at my reshuffled neighborhood. It was strange, but beautiful. Different, but still mine. I still walk that route every night. But now, I pay attention. I notice when things shift, when the night reshuffles the world. And instead of panicking, I explore. I'm a tourist in my own neighborhood. And I've learned to love it that way. The night had reshuffled the world and left me a tourist in my own neighborhood. But tourists see things that residents miss. And I've seen more in the last few months than in all the years before.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.